It was a mean, harmless prank. I remember climbing the rickety ladder to the attic, as my cousins giggled below me, trying not to look down, as every step propelled me further into the smell of insulation and old books. The attic hatch was old and spring-loaded, and a few of them had to hold on to it so it wouldn't slam shut behind me. I remember their taunts, as I stood at the top, trying not to chicken out as the darkness enveloped me. It was the evening of Thanksgiving, and we had just finished clearing the tables after the big feast. Just as quickly as the adults took to drinking and socializing, we took to mischief, scurrying around the house in search of entertainment, away from the lecturing eyes of our parents. As they clinked glasses and pay-per-viewed a grown-up comedy special, we set our sights on the attic, and the mysteries it contained. Harmless, innocent, fun. We were young after all. But when you're young, you often find yourself in deep shit way faster than you can recall getting into it. Your stomach twists and your heart races, and you realize maybe something horrible, irreversible has just happened. You have made a grave mistake. This was my thought as I heard the attic door swing shut behind me, just seconds after planting my feet in the dark corridor. The attic floor shook, dust agitated from the slanted ceiling, and below, my cousins laughed at their trickery. I wasn't particularly afraid of the dark, but there was something off about the little attic space that went beyond the lack of light and fear of mice. I had never been up there before, and it felt suffocating. There was no hanging light bulb, no light fixture with a string. When I pounded on the door for them to let me out, their laughter drowned out my annoying pleas from above. "Very funny, guys. Okay, you got me. You can open it up now. Come on, guys, this isn't funny." When I tried to let myself out, I had the anxious realization that the door was designed to only be open from the bottom. This started the snowball of my predicament, and as my mind raced, the thoughts that followed only fueled the cold sweat on my neck. In the little game of truth and dare, I had been the one with the courage to go up. Of the 4 children, I was the oldest, and the only one tall enough to reach the cord that pulled the hatch down. I was stuck. It didn't take long for their laughter to subside as they came to the same conclusion. Their prank had backfired, and now they either had to get a chair to boost them up, or, worse, get one of the adults. As they scrambled to find a solution, I stretched and explored the dark confinement, enjoying my turn to giggle at their misfortune. That was until I saw the window, and the telescope positioned in front of it. It seemed so out of place, standing there in the stark moonlight. The seemingly new Celestron was angled on its tripod, so it looked out and up at the sky. But there was something frightening about its presence, like I had stumbled across something I shouldn't have. Despite the hair rising on my neck, I felt drawn to it, as if the telescope was inviting me to look, beckoning me. Below, I heard the pitter-patter of footsteps, accompanied by the struggling drag of a chair. But my gaze was held on the telescope, and I found myself walking to it, slowly waving past cobwebs to keep them off my clothes. The sounds of their rescue were starting to fade, as I became entranced with what I might find through the mysterious lens. I had never really looked at the sky before, but I was suddenly compelled to see what the telescope had to show me. Standing before it, I placed my hands delicately on the tube, and lowered my head to the eyepiece. It took me a moment to find the right angle through the lens, but once I did, my whole body froze. I will never forget what I saw that night, as it would forever change me for the worse. Through the looking glass, I saw the moon. Bright and completely full, I got to see the brilliance of it in perfect focus, like the telescope was prepped for that exact moment. I could see every crater in its pearlescent surface, every detail etched in its cosmic existence. I couldn't lift my head or look away. It was like I was possessed to stare at it. And somewhere beyond the lunar regolith, I felt it stare back. I don't know when I started to scream, or who helped carry me down from the attic. All I know is I was hysteric, inconsolable. My parents shouted at the kids and cried, and when they asked for an explanation, I could offer nothing but terrified sobs. That night was ruined once I looked into the eyepiece, and it would be the start of the miserable terror that would become my life from then on. Lunaphobia, an irrational fear of the moon. I could feel it watching me, even after they took me from the house and to the doctor. When I was calm enough to speak, that's what I told them. The moon is watching me. They dismissed me immediately, coming up with any excuse to rationalize and soothe. You just saw spiders, or a rat, they would say. Or you were just scared of being locked in the dark. But it didn't matter how much I closed my eyes, or how fast they drove. I could still feel it. The large eye in the sky, watching me with a sinister intent. They sneered at my raving, and apologized to everyone along the way, clearly embarrassed by my panicked state. They ran tests, CT scans, an MRI, all of which showed nothing. A perfectly healthy child. They tried coaxing me into believing I had made it up, that I was seeking attention. I denied everything, and persisted with my claim. I had seen the moon for what it really was, and it looked back at me. It's still watching now. The holidays passed, and I was introduced to a shrink. A man who passed judgment through his bifocal glasses and pad of paper. My hopes for some common understanding were shattered, however, as it wasn't me who received validation, but my parents. A mild case of anxiety and post-traumatic stress brought on by youth's fear of the dark. A result from being momentarily trapped in the attic. In short, they said I had an episode. One that would surely pass. I was rewarded with a prescription for Ritalin, and was told to get plenty of stimulation outside in the sun. My parents were given the reassurance I would grow out of it, and eventually forget all about it. Or, as my mother put it, it's just a phase. But I never did grow out of it. The moon was always there, always watching, and never forgetting about me. Every night it watched me, begging me to look at it. It wanted me to go back in the attic and look into the telescope one last time. I swore I could hear it lingering outside my bedroom window, waiting, watching, whispering to me in my dreams. Much like my obsession to never forget the moon, I never forgave my parents. They went on as if nothing had happened, making more of an effort to remind me of my medication than seeing if I was okay. Years passed in a slow, horrible crawl. My fear of the moon continued, and the wedge between my family and me deepened. They could never understand my aggressive dislike for drive-in movies, camping, or fireworks shows. The only thing they seemed to understand were the words from the doctor, and the prescriptions he wrote until I was so heavily medicated I was reduced to a life of absence and obedience. As the years went on, I learned to never bring it up again. My obsession would only earn me another appointment, more pills, and a grounding. Everything changed when I finished high school. Growing up, I had become a bit of a recluse, constantly focusing on my studies and turning to books instead of socializing. Nobody wanted to be friends with the weird kid with thick-framed glasses that always appeared on edge, constantly looking over their shoulder. Whenever I wasn't a paranoid mess, I was a medicated zombie going through the motions. In an effort to ignore the moon, I focused on my schoolwork. I studied hard and did really well in all my classes. But the ones I found most fascinating were calculus, physics, and geology. I graduated with a 4.0 GPA, and was able to attend any college I desired. My parents pushed and pulled to go any which way, but my final decision left them speechless, and a bit betrayed. After a shut-in life fearing the white globe in the sky, I decided I would study abroad to be an international surveyor. I would go bask in the sun all around the world, far away from my parents, but more importantly, the cottage that had become my prison. I decided I would chase the sun wherever I could, and take in the world as far as my tuition would allow me. With my academic scores, picking colleges and courses was easy. I had a list of things I wanted to do, places I wanted to see, and I would be able to make work through a decent laptop and the best rucksack money could buy. By the time I secured my funding, equipment, and student visas, my parents could only wave in disbelief as I flew the coop for a better world. Hundreds of miles away from both of their gazes, and the moons. My bachelor's degree came and went in an adventurous blur. I thrived in the sun, traveling in the daylight with a collected wad of plane and bus tickets. Each passing day felt rejuvenating, and the more time went on, the less I was concerned with the setting sun and the gaze that would follow it. It felt like a weight was slowly lifting off my shoulders. Beautiful walking tours and the awe-inspiring architecture of Berlin, to the busy streets and beautiful beaches of Barcelona. In the current day and age, online classes and transferring credits is quick, easy, and convenient. My score stayed high, and my voluntary thesis was genuine and thoughtful. I met many fresh faces, made many friends, and encountered some enthusiastic lovers. I checked in with my parents often, but whenever a holiday would come around, I would always cultivate an excuse to prevent going back home. As months flew by, my calls home became less and less frequent. Eventually, the thought of picking up the phone and speaking to them felt daunting. I didn't want to be the crazy moon girl anymore, and the longer I stayed away, the more she felt like a figment of my imagination. I never stayed in one place too long, and the ever-turning wheel of my college years rolled like a tourist dream. My pale skin became permanently sun-kissed. My heavy backpack grew lighter and lighter as the days melted together. I pushed against the boundaries of my comfort zone, until they fell like the crashing waves of the many beaches I frequented. By the time I finished school in Thailand, I no longer feared the moon. It was as though I was always too fast for it to catch me, and on the times it did, I was too busy to pay it any mind. The day I received my degree, I spent the night wine-drunk in the moonlight, dancing with a charming, muscular grad, whose shirt gradually unbuttoned as the night went on. With my new degree in surveying, I was on top of the world. All I had to do was decide where I wanted to land it. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed, dizzy and hungover. My phone vibrated so angrily against the glass table, I thought it would shatter. Putting the phone to my ear, I felt my sailing adventure stop with a sobering stillness. A relative, who I hadn't heard from since I was a child, spoke with slow, solemn words, and the world around me ceased to move. Black ice. Out of control. Nothing they could do. In the polar opposite weather from my Bangkok hotel, my parents had perished in a car accident. Died on impact, they said. For the first time in 4 years, I needed to go home. I felt ill coming back home. The funeral was a closed casket and the service was short. When I arrived the night before, I realized too late that I didn't actually own funeral attire. My backpack consisted mostly of sundresses, bathing suits, and an array of flip-flops. Standing next to the caskets in one of my mother's own dresses felt just as comforting as it did insulting. Even though I had apparently grown into the same woman she once was, it saddened me that the closest I had felt to her in a long time was in death. My family, what little there was, comforted me as best they could. despite being nearly strangers now. But the hugs felt forced, the words rehearsed. The cousins I had spent Thanksgiving with so long ago had since either ostracized me for being the odd one, or grown old enough to not be bothered I was gone in the first place. The reunion as a whole was a mixed bag. It was nice to see everyone again, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show, and I was reminded why I left the way I did after high school. The "it's good to see yous" and "where have you beens" to the sting of "you should have been here." It didn't bother me as much as it should have. After all, I had always been an outcast growing up. Between my episodes and standoffishness, it's a strange and empty thing, being an only child at your parents' funeral. As they were lowered into the frozen ground, there seemed to be more than sadness surrounding me. There was a peculiar tension in the air, and a series of shameful, shifty eyes. Like I was the only one not let in on the joke. It wasn't until the service concluded and I watched the last attending car drive away that the executor filled me in. My parents' estate, in its entirety, had been left to me. A small chunk of money, a worn-down car, and an old cottage. It was then I realized the significance of being left alone at the parlor so quickly. Nobody wanted to help deal with what was left. I had solely inherited what they owned, sure, but I had also inherited the burden of cleaning it up by myself. I got a hotel for the night, and as I lay awake in bed, I couldn't help but feel just as I did when I was growing up. Like the misshapen piece that didn't fit with the rest of the puzzle. It was then, staring up at the popcorn ceiling, that I decided I didn't want to force it to fit ever again. In the morning, I would start clearing the house and getting it ready for sale. Once that was done, I would be rid of this place forever. As I rolled over to go to sleep, I couldn't help but notice the pale light pooling in from the hotel window. Seeing it gave me a shiver. One I couldn't seem to shake, no matter how tight I wrapped the covers around me. I tossed and turned all night, and when I finally felt myself drifting off, my last thoughts were of the moon. Being in my childhood home felt like navigating a bad dream. I tried keeping my mind busy, focusing on filling the many boxes I had crammed into the rental with the remnants of my parents' last years. The house felt unwelcoming. The floorboards creaked with every step, and a cold wind passed through the walls, like it was being inhaled from the inside. From the moment I arrived, I felt an awful sensation wash over me. Like every inch of my skin was being pinched between frozen fingers. Even as I ferried boxes inside and out and sweat collected on my brow, I couldn't shake the inhospitable climate of the house's interior. It was like walking through a refrigerator. As I bagged up trash, tossed ashtrays, and collected dishes, it only got worse. I double-checked the furnace, and it appeared to be working. Warm air wheezed through the registers, but it just didn't seem to have the strength to lift off the ground. Despite the constant unease of my homecoming, I made quick work of the estate. I dealt with the car that day. My father's old beater Escort. A simple Craigslist ad took care of that. Sold it to a local teenager for a couple $100. Money I would use towards a storage unit for the things I wouldn't donate, like family pictures and the more sentimental things my parents collected. I knew I would be going far once the house was dealt with, but I didn't have the heart to just get rid of them. It was something I would have to deal with at a later date. I wiped down and boxed the framed photographs, making an effort to avoid the happy eyes and smiles as I covered them in bubble wrap. I ignored the pain in my heart as I blanketed trophies and heirlooms in newspaper, things that drudged up memories as I went. Some things took longer to stow away than others, each serving as a bitter reminder that I didn't get to say goodbye. I could feel the building grief, but I could push it off and work through it once the cottage was in order. I would have plenty of time then. I emptied and cleaned the refrigerator, and cleared out the pantry. By the time I made it to packing up the dishes in the cupboard, I had to pick through my mother's wardrobe again to find one of her thicker sweaters. The house kept getting colder, the air thinner. Goosebumps crawled like ice across my skin. The wind outside seemed to be getting louder, more aggressive. The house shifted on its old joists. After the cupboards, I plugged in one of my father's old radios to fill the creeping silence. A local radio station played a mismatch of classic rock and newer pop hits. Commercials played as I wiped surfaces, knocked down cobwebs, and vacuumed the freshened carpet. A seasoned radio host talked of high school basketball and weekend market sales, and the predictions of a cloudless winter sky, accompanied by the monthly supermoon. I unplugged the radio and threw it in a box with other knickknacks. It was dark, getting late, and I had suddenly had enough for the day. I had only made headway in the kitchen and dining room, but my joints ached like I had rolled down a hill. I was working hard, sure, but there was a fatigue and soreness coming on that I couldn't rationalize. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe I was coming down with something. Could it be the dust? Allergies? I thought hopefully after a good night's rest I would feel better. I pulled on my coat and grabbed my keys, ready to exchange the empty house for a hotel room and a bottle of wine. Almost done, I assured myself. I'll just pack up the rest of their things and leave the house fully furnished to help it sell. Easy. It was then I heard the thud, directly above me, like something had fallen over in the attic. My first instinct was to just leave, and check it out in the morning. I could be at the hotel with an open bottle and a hot shower running in less than 10 minutes. I knew, deep down in my soul, that was the right thing to do. I wish I would have just listened to that instinct. Even as my heels turned, and I found myself looking down the hall, to the old hatch in the ceiling. I thought maybe a chipmunk or a raccoon had gotten up there, and if they found a way down here, they would make a mess of the progress I had made. I had photo albums in boxes. If they chewed their way into those, they would be ruined. This was the excuse I fed myself, as my legs moved autonomously down the hall. I don't know why I was trying to rationalize it, and make an excuse to stay. Even as the cold sweat ran down my back. Why couldn't I just go? I looked up at the hatch and its cord, the same one I had to stand on my tippy toes to grasp. I could reach it with ease now. I was an adult, a grown-up, a big girl. It was just an attic. An old, dusty attic. I pulled and the hatch opened like a jaw. The hinge was rusted and squealed with age, protesting with years of rust and neglect. When I yanked harder, it shot open with a loud metallic clang, revealing a shitty, termite-riddled ladder. The draft that seeped from it reeked of insulation and old books. It swept through the house like a gust across an Arctic plain. My joints ached as I made my ascent. I would just go up and find whatever box, make sure there wasn't an animal rooting around, and be on my way. There was nothing to be scared of, after all. When I reached the top, I saw the attic for what it was. Nothing. A small corridor, with slanted ceilings so tight I had to hunch down to fit. A child's nightmare. Nothing more. Without much effort, I found the source of the noise. A cardboard box had fallen from its stack, the lid tossed and spilled open near the window. The box had been filled with little pockmarked books and chewed pens that now littered the floor, next to a piece of furniture covered in a sheet. I couldn't quite make them out from the entrance. I thought maybe they were my baby books, or perhaps my parents' yearbooks from high school. I would have to get closer for a better look. The attic floor protested every step, and I could hear boards groaning through the entire house. When I got close enough, I knew what they were instantly. And I stood there for a time, just staring at them, the worn cover shining in the pale light from the window. They were notebooks. My notebooks. I felt sick. My nerves jolted until they hurt, like a needle pricking the fork of every vein. When I bent down to pick one of them up, my exhausted breath came in a cloud of fog. The composition notebook was tired and swollen, each and every page deeply engraved in pen. I shivered and my hands shook as I opened it, listening to the crackle of pages breathe and flutter. Within them, memories locked away in a vault of fear, depression, and a volley of prescription medications. Rants, ravings, mantras, each a silent cry of the same repetitive thing. The moon is watching. The moon is watching. The moon is watching. The moon is watching. Behind me, the hatch slams shut. It startles me, and I want to scream, but the air feels ripped from my lungs, strangled in the congestion of the attic. The notebook tumbles to the floor as I scramble to the hatch, pounding and stomping to open it back up. The dread washes over me as I realize I'm locked in, just as I was all those years ago. I panic, reach for my phone. The pockets of my coat, my jeans, all empty. Had I left it on the counter? No, not again. It'll be different this time. I'll go through the fucking window if I have to. Panting and out of breath from fighting with the hatch, I go back to the window. Whatever furniture is hiding under the sheet is about to go through it. The air is heavy and cold. My legs shake and struggle. What is happening to me? I raise a shaking hand and weakly tug on the sheet. It slides to the floor in a flurry of dust, and I stop. The telescope. It's smaller than I remember. But I was so little then. The Celestron looks like it hasn't aged a day. Like it's fresh out of the package. But it's not its pristine condition that frightens me. I feel drawn to it, and it warms like an open flame. It's angled, up and out just like it was on that fateful night. I know what it's pointing at. I can feel it. The eye in the sky that's glaring down. That always has. Its presence feels like lost ozone after a nuclear blast. Shifting. Writhing. Waiting. My hands find the telescope, and I force myself to look away. The notebook I once held is splayed open. The angry writing bold against the sea of chewed pens. The moon is watching. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.